The radio crackled once, static biting through the frequency like teeth on aluminum foil. Then silence. The kind of silence that makes experienced controllers lean forward in their chairs, fingers hovering over keyboards, eyes fixed on radar screens that suddenly feel too bright. Major David Kessler had worked air traffic control at Bagram Airfield for 11 months, and he'd learned to read silence the way some men read obituaries, with dread and the certainty that something precious had just been lost. The mission clock read for 47 hours. Somewhere over the Kunar Valley, an A-10 Thunderbolt II had gone dark. Call sign, Widow 6, pilot Captain Mariana Kovac. The name meant nothing to Kessler then. It should have. The pre-dawn sky over Afghanistan stretched like bruised skin, purple and yellow where dawn threatened the horizon. Kessler's headset crackled again, and this time there was something underneath the static, a voice, female, steady as iron rebar. Bagram control Widow 6, taking fire, hydraulics compromised, starboard engine temperature critical. No panic, just facts delivered like she was reading a grocery list. Kessler's pulse quickened. He'd heard pilots scream before, heard them pray, heard them go silent mid-sentence. This woman sounded like she was discussing the weather. 6 Bagram, copy your traffic. What's your position? Static answered him. Then, approximately 12 clicks northeast of Firebase Copper. Multiple hostile positions engaging from ridgeline. I'm staying on station. Kessler blinked. Staying on station. Her aircraft was dying, hydraulics bleeding out somewhere over mountains that had killed better pilots in better aircraft, and she was staying on station. He glanced at Lieutenant Morrison, the backup controller, who'd gone pale. Sir, that's insane. She needs to RTB immediately. But Kessler was already pulling up the tactical feed. Firebase Copper, a small outpost, barely 40 soldiers, nestled in a valley that intelligence had promised was secure. 3 hours ago, they'd started screaming for air support. Enemy forces had them surrounded, ammunition running critical. 2 Apache gunships had already made passes, but the enemy was dug in deep, firing from caves and fortified positions that ate rockets and spat back RPGs. The A-10 had been their last hope. Now their last hope was burning. Kessler keyed his mic. Widow 6, we copy. Be advised, nearest recovery asset is 23 minutes out. Recommend immediate egress to negative Bagram. Her voice cut through his protocol like a blade through paper. I've got Americans taking fire down here. Widow 6 is staying on station until Winchester or Flameout, whichever comes first. The radio crackled. Somewhere in the darkness, an A-10 Thunderbolt II, designed to take punishment, built around a cannon that fired depleted uranium rounds the size of beer bottles, was coming apart in the sky. The tactical feed showed Firebase Copper as a small green dot surrounded by red hostiles, like a single healthy cell drowning in infection. Kessler watched the altitude readout for Widow 6 fluctuate. 8,000 feet, 7,500, back to 8,000. She was fighting the controls, wrestling with an aircraft that wanted to die. The A-10, affectionately called the Warthog by those who flew her, was built for exactly this: low, slow, close air support, absorbing damage that would obliterate sleeker aircraft. But everything has limits. Every machine has a breaking point. Kessler was about to discover that Captain Mariana Kovac did not. Bagram Widow 6, beginning gun run. Stand by. Lieutenant Morrison grabbed Kessler's shoulder. Sir, she can't, not with compromised hydraulics. If she goes low. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Low meant into the teeth of the enemy fire. Low meant RPGs could track her. Low meant if the aircraft failed, there'd be no altitude to recover, no room to eject safely. Low meant death, statistically speaking. Kessler knew the numbers. The survival rate for ejection below 1,000 feet over hostile territory hovered around 12%. He keyed the mic, his voice carrying the weight of command and the desperation of a man watching a tragedy unfold in real time. Widow 6, negative on gun run. You are ordered to egress immediately. Acknowledge. For 3 seconds only static. Then, respectfully Bagram, go fuck yourself. Widow 6 is engaging. And somewhere over the Hindu Kush, as dawn began to bleed light across ancient stone, An A-10 Thunderbolt II dropped from the sky like a falling angel, trailing smoke and fury, her cannon already spinning up to firing speed. The GAU-8 Avenger, the massive 7-barrel Gatling gun that the A-10 was essentially built around, could fire 3,900 rounds per minute. Each round weighed nearly a pound. When it fired, the sound was legendary, a deep, resonating brrrrrrrt that rattled windows miles away and turned enemy positions into pink mist and shredded metal. Kessler had heard it through radio feeds dozens of times. He'd never heard it sound like prayer before. The tactical feed updated in real-time, data streaming from multiple sources: satellite imagery, drone feeds, the A-10's own targeting systems. Widow 6 descended through 7,500 feet, then 7,000, airspeed bleeding as she configured for the gun run. Enemy positions lit up on infrared muzzle flashes like fireflies in the darkness. They were firing everything they had. Tracers arced upward in graceful, deadly curves. Kessler's throat tightened. On the ground at Firebase Copper, Staff Sergeant Miguel Torres pressed himself against the HESCO barriers, dirt and concrete chips raining down from the latest mortar impact. His squad was down to 4 men from 12. Ammunition was critical. 2 wounded, 1 critical. The Taliban had them zeroed in, and it was only a matter of time before they were overrun. He'd made peace with dying. What he hadn't made peace with was the kid next to him, Private First Class Danny Vickers, 19 years old, from some town in Oregon whose name Torres could never remember, dying before he'd even really lived. Then he heard it, that sound, that beautiful, terrible, God-sent sound, brrrrrrrt. Torres looked up, and through the smoke and pre-dawn gloom he saw her. The A-10 came in low, impossibly low, barely clearing the ridgeline. Even in the darkness he could see the damage, smoke trailing from the starboard engine, parts of the fuselage scorched black. She was dying, but she was there. The cannon fired in a sustained burst, and the world turned white and red. The GAU-8's rounds impacted the enemy position with the force of a meteor strike, each depleted uranium penetrator moving at 3,500 feet per second. Fortified positions that had shrugged off rockets simply ceased to exist. Kessler watched the thermal bloom on his screen, heard Torres screaming over the radio, not in fear this time, but in desperate, disbelieving joy. Air support is engaging. Air support is engaging. Who is that? Who the hell is that? Kessler keyed his mic, voice steady despite his racing heart. Call sign Widow 6, Sergeant, Captain Mariana Kovac, and she's not done yet. She wasn't. Widow 6 pulled up, the damaged A-10 groaning through the maneuver, climbing back to 5,000 feet. Kessler could hear her breathing now over the radio, sharp and controlled. Combat breathing. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds out. They taught it in survival school. It kept you calm when your body wanted to flood with adrenaline and terror. Bagram, Widow 6. Good effects on target. Enemy scattered but regrouping on the north ridge. I've got maybe 2 more passes in her before the hydraulics give out completely. Lieutenant Morrison's eyes were wide. 2 more passes, she shouldn't even be flying. But she was. Widow 6 banked hard, the A-10's distinctive twin-tail silhouette cutting through the dawn like a shark's fin through water. Kessler pulled up her file, fingers flying across the keyboard. Captain Mariana Kovac, 32 years old, 217 combat hours. Grew up in Detroit, daughter of a factory worker and a nurse. Joined the Air Force at 20, fought her way into A-10s when half the brass wanted to mothball the entire platform. Her call sign, Widow 6, had a story, but it was redacted in her file. Redacted meant classified. Classified meant something had happened, something significant enough that it couldn't be public knowledge. The A-10 descended again, and this time Kessler could see it through the drone feed. The starboard engine was barely functioning, belching black smoke, the hydraulic fluid leaving a thin trail in the air like arterial spray. She should eject. Every regulation, every training manual, every survival instinct should be screaming at her to pull the ejection handles and take her chances with the parachute. Instead, Widow 6 lined up for another gun run. Torres watched her come in, and this time he could see the damage clearly. Parts of the armor plating were scorched or missing entirely. One of the landing gear doors hung at an odd angle. The aircraft was a flying wreck, held together by titanium bathtub armor around the cockpit and sheer willpower. BRRRRRRRT. The cannon spoke again, and more enemy positions evaporated. Torres saw men running, abandoning their weapons, fleeing in terror from the beast in the sky that refused to die. Over the radio, Firebase Copper's commander, Captain Lawrence Holt, came on the line, his voice thick with emotion. Widow 6 Copper Actual, you've broken the attack. They're retreating. You've saved us. Thank you doesn't even begin to cover it. Static crackled. Then Kavek's voice, still steady, still calm. Copper Actual, Widow 6, just doing my job, sir. Glad I could help. Bagram, Widow 6. Winchester on ammunition. Attempting to egress to, the radio cut to static. On Kessler's screen, Widow 6's altitude indicator plummeted. 8,000 feet. 7,000, 6,000. The descent rate was too fast, too steep, uncontrolled. Widow 6, Bagram, say your status, Kessler shouted into the mic, abandoning protocol, abandoning calm. Widow 6, respond, static. Then breaking through like a ghost's whisper, complete hydraulic failure, aircraft unresponsive. The transmission cut off. Kessler's blood turned to ice. Lieutenant Morrison was on his feet, hands pressed against the console. Other controllers had stopped working, all eyes on the screens. Widow 6's altitude continued to drop. 5,000 feet, 4,000. The aircraft was in a flat spin now, rotating lazily, smoke pouring from both engines. Kessler pulled up the ejection parameters, praying she'd punch out, but the altitude was already marginal. 3,500 feet, 3,000. Eject, Morrison whispered. Eject, Goddammit, eject. 2,500 feet, 2,000. The A-10 was a dark cross against the brightening sky, spinning, falling, dying. 1,500 feet. Kessler couldn't watch but couldn't look away. 1,000 feet. And then, impossibly, the spin stopped. The nose dropped, and for one impossible moment, Widow 6 wasn't falling, she was flying. Barely. The A-10 leveled out at 800 feet, wings wobbling, flying like a wounded bird with broken wings, but flying. Kavek's voice returned, strained now, the first crack in her composure. Bagram, Widow 6, I've got manual reversion. No hydraulics. She's flying on cables and prayer. Attempting emergency landing at Bagram. Estimate, 23 minutes. 23 minutes. Kessler did the math instantly. Firebase Copper was 90 nautical miles from Bagram. At the A-10's damaged airspeed, flying on manual controls, fighting the aircraft every second. It was impossible. The A-10 could handle battle damage better than any other platform, but this was beyond damage. This was a corpse that didn't know it was dead yet. Kessler keyed his mic, choosing his words carefully. Widow 6, Bagram, copy your traffic. We're clearing the runway and scrambling emergency response. You can do this, Captain. Bring her home. No response for several seconds. Then so quiet he almost missed it. Roger, Bagram, see you soon. The next 23 minutes aged Kessler a decade. Every controller in the tower watched Widow 6's progress on radar, that little blip crawling across the screen at 180 knots, altitude holding at 800 feet. Too low. If she lost power, if the controls failed, if anything went wrong, she'd have seconds, not minutes. The sun was rising now, painting the sky in golds and reds. On the drone feed, Kessler could see Widow 6 clearly now. It looked like it had been through a war, which, in fairness, it had. The starboard engine was completely dead, the port engine barely functioning. Large sections of the fuselage were blackened or torn. One of the vertical stabilizers had holes punched through it. The landing gear, Kessler's stomach sank. The landing gear indicators were showing red, damaged or inoperable. Lieutenant Morrison saw it too. She's going to have to belly it in. A belly landing in a damaged aircraft. The A-10 was designed for it, the titanium bathtub around the cockpit built to protect the pilot during exactly this scenario. But designed for it didn't mean safe. It meant survivable. Maybe. Kessler opened a channel to emergency services. This is Bagram Control. We have an A-10 inbound, heavy damage, landing gear likely inoperable. Pilot will attempt emergency belly landing. I want foam on runway 03, fire suppression standing by, and medevac on the taxiway. This is not a drill. The voice that came back was professional, calm, practiced. Copy Bagram Control. Emergency services deploying now. Runway will be ready in 7 minutes. 7 minutes. Widow 6 was 16 minutes out. Kessler watched the clock, watched the radar blip, watched the altimeter that occasionally flickered as if the A-10 wasn't sure it wanted to keep flying. At Firebase Copper, Staff Sergeant Torres stood on the HESCO barriers, watching the sky where Widow 6 had disappeared. The battlefield was silent now. Enemy forces scattered or eliminated, dawn light revealing the carnage, scorched earth where the GAU-8 had spoken, abandoned weapons, empty fighting positions. His men were alive, because of her. "Who is she?" Private Vickers asked, his young face still pale from fear and adrenaline. Torres didn't answer immediately. He just stared at the sky, at the trail of smoke that marked Widow 6's path toward Bagram, toward home, toward whatever fate waited. "Someone we're going to remember," he finally said. At Bagram, the crash crews deployed. Fire trucks took positions along the runway, foam cannons ready. Ambulances waited with engines running. Medical teams stood by with stretchers and equipment. Everyone knew what was coming. Everyone had seen pilots die attempting exactly what Captain Kovac was about to attempt. Major Kessler stood at the tower window now, binoculars in hand, watching the eastern sky. Widow 6 Bagram, runway 03 is clear. Wind 080 at 7 knots. Fire suppression standing by. You are cleared for emergency landing. Static. Then, Roger Bagram beginning approach. And there on the horizon a dark speck trailing smoke, growing larger. The A-10 came in low over the perimeter and Kessler could see through his binoculars what the drone feed had shown, an aircraft that should not be flying. The port engine was producing barely any thrust. The starboard engine was dead weight. The fuselage was torn and scorched, and yet she flew. Kovac's voice came over the radio, calm again, that same grocery list delivery. "Bagram, Widow 6, landing gear will not deploy, attempting belly landing. If this goes wrong, tell my father I kept my promise." Before Kessler could respond, before he could ask what promise, Widow 6 was over the threshold. She came in nose-high, bleeding airspeed, the port engine screaming. At the last possible second, Kovac cut the engine. For a moment, the A-10 hung in the air, silent except for wind over damaged metal. Then the titanium bathtub armor hit the runway with a sound like the world ending. Sparks exploded in a fountain of white and orange. The A-10 skidded down the runway, metal screaming against concrete, foam erupting from fire suppression systems, creating a white cloud that swallowed the aircraft. Kessler held his breath. The entire tower held its breath. The A-10 slid for what felt like an eternity, spinning slightly, shedding parts, until finally, impossibly, it came to rest 200 yards from the end of the runway. For 3 seconds, nothing moved. Then the canopy blew. Emergency explosive bolts detonated, and the canopy flew off in a perfect arc. A figure stood up in the cockpit, silhouetted against the rising sun. Captain Mariana Kovac, call sign Widow 6, climbed out of her dying aircraft on her own power. The tower erupted in cheers. Lieutenant Morrison was crying. Kessler found his hands shaking as he keyed the mic. "Widow 6 Bagram, welcome home, Captain." He could see her on the runway now, surrounded by crash crews and medical personnel. She waved them off, walked around the front of her destroyed A-10, placed one hand on the nose, just below where the gun had been. She stood there for a long moment, head bowed, and Kessler understood. She was saying goodbye. An hour later, after the medics had checked her over and found nothing worse than bruises and exhaustion, after the intelligence officers had debriefed her and the maintenance crews had begun assessing what was left of her aircraft, Major Kessler finally met Captain Mariana Kovac in person. She was smaller than he'd imagined, maybe 5'6", dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, eyes the color of winter sky. She looked tired, but when she shook his hand, her grip was iron. "Major Kessler, thank you for your support up there." Her voice was the same as over the radio, steady, calm, unremarkable. The voice of someone who'd flown through hell and come out the other side without flinching. Kessler gestured to the window where the wreck of Widow Six was being hauled off the runway. Captain, I've been doing this job for almost a year. I've never seen anything like what you just did. You saved 40 men today. Kavek looked out at her aircraft and something flickered across her face, not pride, not satisfaction. Something deeper, sadness maybe, or regret. 41, she said quietly. 41 men at Firebase Copper. She turned back to him. And I didn't save them, Major. My aircraft did. The A-10. She took everything they threw at her and kept flying. That's what she was designed to do, protect soldiers on the ground. I just steered. Kessler wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that the aircraft was just metal and fuel, that she was the miracle, but something in her eyes stopped him. Lieutenant Morrison appeared in the doorway. Major, the wing commander wants a full report. And sir, the press has already picked up the story. Wounded saves surrounded outpost. It's going to be everywhere. Kavek's expression hardened. No press, Morrison blinked. Ma'am, with respect, you don't get a choice. This is the kind of story that, no press. Each word was a stone dropped in still water. I did my job. The men at Copper are alive. That's all that matters. I don't need recognition. I don't want it. She looked at Kessler. Please, Major, no press, no interviews, no cameras. Kessler nodded slowly. He didn't understand, but he recognized the look of someone running from something. I'll see what I can do, Captain, but the story's already out there. I can't stop that. Kavek's shoulders sagged slightly. I know, I don't want to be a hero. Heroes get attention. Attention brings questions. Questions bring the past. She walked to the window, stared out at the wreckage of her A-10. Call sign Widow Six isn't a random assignment, Major. It's a reminder of what I lost, of what I cost. Kessler exchanged a glance with Morrison. What happened, Captain? For a long moment, Kavek didn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I had a wingman 3 years ago. Different combat zone, different war, same aircraft. We were on a close air support mission, Taliban positions engaging friendly forces. I was Widow 5 then, he was Widow 6. Captain Alexander Reeves. Best pilot I ever flew with. Better than me if I'm honest. She paused, and Kessler could see her hands tighten on the window frame. We went in hot, taking fire from all sides. His aircraft got hit, hydraulics damaged, just like mine today. I told him to break off to egress to get somewhere safe and eject. He refused, said he wasn't leaving me alone down there, said we'd finish the mission together. Her voice cracked just slightly. We finished the mission. The soldiers on the ground lived, and Alex, his hydraulics failed completely on the way back. He lost control, couldn't eject in time. I watched him go down. Watch the fireball, watch the smoke. The tower was silent except for the hum of equipment and the distant sound of aircraft engines. Kavek turned to face them, and her eyes were dry but haunted. They gave me his call sign after that. Widow Six. Because I survived and he didn't. Because I have to carry him with me. Because every time someone says my call sign, I remember that the only reason I'm alive is because someone better than me decided I was worth dying for. She straightened her shoulders, and the moment of vulnerability passed like a storm cloud moving on. So no, Major, I don't want to be a hero. I don't want the attention. I just want to fly. I just want to keep soldiers alive, because that's what Alex would have done. Kessler felt something tight in his chest. He'd spent months watching blips on screens, tracking aircraft, ensuring safe passages. He'd forgotten that every blip was a person, and every person was carrying their own war. I'll keep your name out of it as much as I can, Captain, he said finally. But the men at Firebase Copper know what you did. Staff Sergeant Torres is already telling anyone who will listen about the pilot who wouldn't leave them behind. You saved his life and his men. They'll want to thank you. Kavek smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. They can thank the A-10. She's the real hero. She saluted, sharp, crisp, perfect, and walked out of the tower. Kessler watched her go, this small woman who'd flown a dying aircraft through hell and refused to be called brave. Morrison leaned against the console. She's wrong, you know, about the aircraft being the hero. Kessler nodded. I know, but she needs to believe it. It's the only way she can keep flying. Over the next week, the story spread despite Kavek's wishes. Not through official channels, Kessler kept his promise there, but through the soldiers. Word of mouth traveled fast in theater. Torres told his story to anyone who'd listen. Within days, every soldier at Bagram knew about Widow Six. the pilot who'd flown a broken A-10 through impossible odds to save surrounded men. The story grew in the telling, as war stories do. Some versions had her taking fire from 50 enemy positions. Others had her flying with one engine completely gone. A few even claimed she'd landed the aircraft with no landing gear intentionally, some kind of tactical genius. But the core remained the same, a pilot who refused to leave soldiers behind, who'd rather die than abandon her mission. Kavek hated every second of it. She couldn't walk to the chow hall without soldiers staring, pointing, whispering. Young enlisted troops would stop her to shake her hand. Officers who'd never spoken to her before suddenly wanted to buy her coffee. She endured it with the same calm professionalism she'd shown in the cockpit, but Kessler, who'd made it his business to keep an eye on her, could see it wearing her down. 2 weeks after the Firebase Copper mission, Kavak requested a transfer. Back to the States, training command, anything that would get her out of Afghanistan. The wing commander denied it, not because he was cruel but because the war needed pilots like her. Because the A-10 community was small and getting smaller, and losing someone with her skills would cost lives down the line. So Kavak stayed and flew. Mission after mission, close air support, always volunteering for the dangerous ones, the ones where the enemy fire was thickest and the odds were longest. Kessler watched her flight reports pile up. She was accumulating combat hours at a terrifying rate. 217 became 250, then 275, then 300, and every mission she came back, sometimes with damage, sometimes flying on fumes, but always back. The soldiers started calling her Saint Widow. The pilots called her the Iron Lady. The Taliban, according to intercepted communications, called her the Ghost because they couldn't kill her, couldn't stop her, couldn't understand how she kept surviving. Kavak called herself nothing. She just flew. 3 months after Firebase Copper, Staff Sergeant Torres rotated home. Before he left, he tracked down Kavak at the flight line where she was doing her pre-flight inspection on a new A-10. Not the one she'd destroyed, that bird had been written off, too damaged to repair, but a replacement bird with the same call sign painted on the nose, Widow 6. Captain Kavak. Torres approached tentatively, as if approaching a legend might make it disappear. Kavak looked up from her inspection, saw his face, and immediately knew who he was. Sergeant Torres, Firebase Copper. He nodded, suddenly unable to speak. Up close she looked so normal, just a pilot doing her job, not a saint, not a ghost, just a woman. "I wanted to thank you," he finally managed. "For my life, for my men's lives, for everything." Kavak set down her inspection clipboard, and for the first time since Kessler had met her, she smiled genuinely. "You're going home, Sergeant, back to your family. That's all the thanks I need. Tell me about them." So Torres did. He told her about his wife, Maria, and his 2 kids, 7-year-old Sophia and 5-year-old Miguel Jr. He told her about the house they were buying in San Antonio, about his daughter's soccer games he'd missed, about his son's first day of school he'd seen only through photographs. And Kavak listened, really listened, the way people listen when they understand that these small, precious details are what war is actually about. Not tactics or strategy or glory, but kids' soccer games and first days of school. "You make sure you're there for the next game," Kavak said when he finished. "You make sure you're there for every moment you can be, because those moments, that's what you were fighting for, that's what we're all fighting for." Torres nodded, throat tight. "I will, because of you." He paused then. "Captain, can I ask, why Widow 6? Everyone knows there's a story, but no one knows what it is." Kavak's expression closed off just slightly. But maybe because Torres had earned it, maybe because he was going home and she'd never see him again, she answered. "I lost someone important, someone who saved my life by giving his. The call sign reminds me why I fly, not for glory, not for myself, but for the people on the ground who need us, for the families waiting at home, for the moments like your daughter's soccer games that shouldn't be stolen by war." She held out her hand. "Go home, Sergeant, be a good father, be a good husband. Live the life Captain Reeves died to protect." Torres shook her hand, tears streaming down his face now, not caring who saw. "I will. I swear to God I will." Kavek watched him walk away toward the transport that would take him to Qatar, then Germany, then home. She watched until he was out of sight, then turned back to her aircraft and resumed her inspection. Kessler had watched the whole exchange from the tower, binoculars in hand. He lowered them slowly, feeling something shift in his understanding of Captain Mariana Kavek. She wasn't running from glory. She was running toward purpose. Back in Detroit, in a small house on the east side, a man named Jacob Kavek received a letter. His daughter's handwriting precise and controlled, same as always. He read it slowly, sitting in the kitchen where he'd raised her after her mother died, where he'd taught her that strength wasn't about never falling but about always getting back up. The letter was short. "Dad, I kept my promise. When things got bad, when I should have quit, I remembered what you told me, that we don't abandon people who need us, that we don't give up just because things are hard. I'm still here. I'm still flying. I'm still fighting, and I'm coming home soon. Love, Mari." Jacob folded the letter carefully and placed it in a box with all the others. 27 letters now, one for each month she'd been deployed. He walked to the window and looked up at the sky the way he did every day and whispered a prayer to a God he wasn't sure he believed in anymore. Keep her safe. Just keep her safe. 6,000 miles away, Captain Mariana Kavek climbed into her A-10, strapped herself in, and fired up the engines. The familiar vibration, the smell of jet fuel, the weight of the helmet on her head. This was home now. Not Detroit, not the house she'd grown up in, not the memories of better times. This cockpit, this machine, this mission. The radio crackled. Widow 6, Bagram control. We have troops in contact, grid coordinates being transmitted now. QRF is 30 minutes out, you're the closest air support. Kavek checked her fuel, her weapons load, her systems. Everything green, everything ready. She keyed her mic, and her voice was steady, calm, unremarkable. Bagram control, Widow 6 copies, going hot, rolling in 3 minutes. And somewhere over Afghanistan, as the sun climbed higher in an endless sky, an A-10 Thunderbolt II roared toward another battle, carrying a pilot who'd learned that the only way to outrun ghosts was to save the living. The aircraft bore the scars of previous missions, patches on the fuselage where armor had been replaced, new paint over scorched metal. But she flew true. Kessler watched the radar blip move across his screen, heading toward danger, heading toward people who needed her. He thought about tours, probably somewhere over the Atlantic now, heading home to his family. He thought about Kavek, heading the opposite direction, toward fire and death and the terrible mathematics of combat. And he understood, finally, what made someone like her different. It wasn't bravery. Brave people felt fear and overcame it. Kavek had evolved beyond fear into something else entirely. Purpose, pure, crystallized, unshakable purpose. The radio crackled. Bagram, Widow 6, visual on friendlies, taking fire from multiple positions. Beginning attack, run. Kessler leaned forward in his chair. Copy, Widow 6, we're with you. And in that moment, in that eternal moment that stretched between heartbeats and radio transmissions, Major David Kessler realized that he wasn't just watching a pilot. He was witnessing a legend being written in real time, one mission at a time, one life saved at a time. Widow 6 descended into the fire, and the cannon spoke again, that beautiful, terrible sound, and somewhere on the ground, soldiers who'd been certain they would die suddenly found themselves with a future. And that, Kessler thought, was what heroes actually looked like. Not glory, not recognition, just someone who showed up when the world was ending and refused to let it end. The story didn't end there, though legends rarely end cleanly. They linger, evolving through retelling, becoming something larger than the truth but somehow more true than facts.